Welcome to our Sunday conversation, joined by Brian Neubert and Tom Dienhart. I want to thank our sponsor, the Purdue Union Club Hotel, newly reinvented and open for business, obviously, at Purdue, the 811 restaurant, as well as the Boiler Up Bar. When you're on campus, make sure you stop by and visit. Also, a reminder that we have 40-day free trials available to GoldandBlack.com. And we appreciate all of our subscribers. But if you are interested in subscribing, you can go to the site and do so there. So, Brian, we're going to start with obviously the Boilermakers had a big win last night, Saturday night, against the Minnesota Golden Gophers, a game that was not pretty for the first 17, 18 minutes for Purdue, but the Boilermakers really gathered themselves offensively. But really, a lot of the story might have been defensively too. But you look at that, a big win for Purdue, especially playing without Sasha Stefanovic.
Yeah, Purdue not having Sasha Stefanovic is a big deal still, and that shouldn't be lost in the ultimately one-sided result here against Minnesota. For Purdue to beat Minnesota, a good team, the way they beat Minnesota without Sasha Stefanovic, I think really says something about everybody else. Because I think, they carried out their defensive game plan almost to the smallest detail. It was getting beat there for a while based on how Minnesota had to beat it. But I think, one thing that this game kind of showed is that this team, for as young as it is and as shorthanded as it might be right now, doesn't really wallow. It doesn't really get fazed by a whole lot of things and let that kind of disruption stick. Purdue easily could have, lost its focus a little bit after Minnesota's outlier shooting to start the game, kind of sucker punched them, but they didn't. Right around the time, maybe halfway through the first half, when Minnesota cooled off a little bit, Purdue's guards started attacking off the dribble a little bit. That gave them a little bit of offensive life. And then in the second half, I don't understand how a team can go 0 for 5 in the first half and then 8 for 10 in the second. I've just never understood that about basketball. When it's not one guy, it's everybody. But obviously, they just kind of waited the shooting out. The shooting came at the right time, and the rest was history. But this was a really good all-around, final 30 minutes of basketball from Purdue, and a really good win for them, especially under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, I tell you, I know you've said this team's a work in progress defensively. Probably don't think it's ever going to be a great defensive team, but boy, a big storyline last night was that defensive effort by Purdue on the Golden Gopher All-American Marcus Carr. In particular, Brian, of course, Eric Hunter Jr., you wrote about him, talked about him in your post-game audio podcast as well. Just, talk about his contributions. Just 4 points, but again, so much more beyond that made him valuable against the Gophers.
Yeah, he was really good offensively in that second half. I thought he was in total command for Purdue offensively, kind of the way he was in the Notre Dame game a while back. I thought it was no coincidence whatsoever how Purdue operated offensively, that its point guard was playing that way. But from a defensive perspective, obviously, this was a resume game type of game for him in terms of his defensive capabilities. But at the same time, Purdue's whole defensive plan is built around giving people help and overcommitting to great players and making the fourth and fifth option types of guys, or the guys who don't shoot well, beat you. And for that reason, the whole team really deserves a lot of credit for what they did against Marcus Carr. But Hunter did a great job. I mean, obviously, he's the most important piece of that puzzle, and he did a fantastic job. But the days of any good defensive game plan being executed being attributable to one player and one player alone are over now, because the way Purdue defends, it's a very pragmatic approach where it's like you're going to dedicate your resources where they make the most sense, and you're going to move your resources away from where they make the least sense. And that gets you beat sometimes when Montez Mathis of Rutgers goes off, and that can make for some situations where a bunch of randos from Minnesota make 5 to 6 to start the game, or 6 to 8, whatever it was, and makes for some nervous moments. But at the end of the day, your game plan against Marcus Carr did something to Marcus Carr that nobody's done to Marcus Carr. And that is most attributable to the effort Eric Hunter put in on the ball.
You look at that and you start to look down the path of what's next. I mean, obviously Purdue right now, if you read read Mike DeCourcy or the ESPN bracketology, Joe Lunardi, Purdue is pretty firmly entrenched in a 6-7 type seed in the NCAA tournament. We know there's a long way to go, but Purdue's schedule is interesting because you go to Maryland, a team 3-7 on in the league on Tuesday, a game also that Purdue struggled to hold off. Now, Purdue had a good-sized lead against Maryland back in December, but Maryland came back. No easy games, but it does, if you kind of look at it from a very broad stroke view, Purdue's schedule is favorable to do very well in the second half of this or the last 9 games, or how many games they get in the Big Ten season. Purdue sitting in good position, I guess is my point, Brian, as you look down the road here through the month of February.
They're sitting in a great spot. Yeah, I mean, they're 7-4 in the Big Ten, the most challenging league in college basketball, and they're doing it with one of the youngest teams in college basketball. You're 7-4 right now. You may as well be 8-4 because you lost the game on your schedule that is the most likely win, that being the home game against Nebraska. So effectively, to use kind of, Ken Palm terminology here, your effective field goal percentage in terms of your Big Ten record is essentially 8-4. Not taking anything for granted, but I think that's the one game you kind of can take for granted. So for Purdue to be 7-4 without having played that Nebraska game is even more impressive when you take that into account. Maryland coming up Tuesday night. Maryland's a better team than 3-7 in the Big Ten. Clearly, that's the case. But that's the Big Ten. I mean, Minnesota was 0-4 on the road, coming to Purdue. But look who they played. I mean, every team they lost to on the road was like a top 20 team at the time they played them. But that's the same team that beat Michigan. That's the same team that beat Iowa. Every team in the Big Ten is better than its record, probably except for Nebraska. So that's just the nature of the Big Ten. So if you look at Purdue's record that way, that every team is better than their record, that means Purdue's pretty damn good. Because to be 7-4 through 11 games in this league with this young a team, Purdue's got something special on its hands here growing, if you ask me. And you're in the tournament right now, and you're going to have to probably totally melt down in order to not be in the tournament when all things are said and done, because you got a lot of home games left and a lot of your hardest games, and hard is relative in the Big Ten because everyone's hard, but the worst of the worst is kind of behind you. You've been to Iowa, you've been to Illinois, you played Michigan, you went to Michigan State and won at Michigan State, you went to Ohio State and won at Ohio State. I know Indiana is not great this year, but you won at Indiana, which is never an easy thing to do. The worst is behind you, and you're 7-4 in the Big Ten without the most winnable game on your schedule having been played. You couldn't have realistically asked Purdue to be in a better spot through 11 Big Ten games than they are right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, just kind of funny. I mean, a storyline that continues to grow, Brian, as you know, is these post-game workouts. Moments after the players get done conducting interviews with you and others. I mean, Jaden Ivy, Brandon Newman this last time, I think Travion Williams, you said, was on the court as well. It's almost becoming a thing where pretty soon almost be a full-blown practice self-run by the players after these home games. It seems like it's been something that's been well received among the fan base nationally as well. And again, a fun little sidebar storyline to what's been a very fun, surprising season.
Yeah, if I was making money off Twitter, which no one is, I would owe Jaden Ivy a cut of that, because that is chum in the water to Purdue fans. I mean, that stuff has gone crazy. A more jaded individual than I might say, hey, these guys know that this is going to end up on Twitter. But this is the way Jaden Ivy is, and this is the way Brandon Newman is. And that's why, all personal feelings, whatever aside, I don't know how a Purdue fan couldn't be infatuated with this team, absolutely adore this team, because truth be told, I don't know if Matt Painter's had a team that has wanted to be good more than this team does, both individually and as a team. And it's one thing for guys to say that stuff. It's another thing for players to actually do something about it. And I should qualify that little snarky comment I made earlier. In fact, to add that I know that this has been done outside the public eye too. I know that when Purdue came back from Indy after the Crossroads Classic against Notre Dame, they got off the bus. Jaden Ivy went right to the gym to shoot. I know last year that long after games, Brandon Newman was still in Mackey Arena shooting around when he wasn't even playing. I know that because I was doing my silly little video after games, and Brandon Newman would be on the court, so I'd have to go somewhere else. So this is what they are, and it's not just those two guys. It's when you see how much better Travion Williams has gotten, the shape he's gotten himself in, the way he's carrying himself seemingly as a leader, as a guy who kind of wants the ball in situations. When you see what Eric Hunter's become as a leader, things like that, you see a team that is just really, really wanting to be good. And I think their efforts have been rewarded way ahead of schedule here. Mason Gillis, I mean, that was the ultimate Mason Gillis game last night. And what he's meant to this team, can't even be partially reflected in statistics to this point. He's been a revelation too. I've used the word revelation more in a season this year than I ever have, because Zach Edey's been a revelation. Mason Gillis has been a revelation. Jaden Ivey's been a revelation. Who was the last guy I was talking about? Brandon Newman's been a revelation. Just a really, really compelling team to follow.
Oh, it is Sunday. We can talk about revelations, so that's all right. We're good on that.
We're not talking about fire coming down from the sky here.
I know. I'm not,
sudden discoveries.
That may be our first biblical reference in the history of GoldandBlack, but we're not making any public statement there. But one thing about Maryland
here.
Yeah, one thing about Maryland, looking at how the Terrapins have done, I think they're 0-4 at home, but yet look at their road wins at Illinois, at Wisconsin. This is a team that can be very dangerous, and it will be an interesting storyline. And of course, they also won at Minnesota. I think that's their 3 conference wins. So Purdue will have its hands full at every game, because that's just the nature of the Big Ten. I think that's a fair assessment as we look forward. All right, we'll change the topics here in a more of a theoretical looking at the finances in the Big Ten, and we've hit been much documented. You're starting to see fiscal reporting, the D1 ticker and some other places, about how schools are reporting fiscal year 20. And I'm a little uncertain exactly when the fiscal year ends, whether it's a June 30. I don't think these are December 31st reports, but I could be wrong. Michigan showed a $12 million surplus, but they are projecting an $80 million deficit in 21. Iowa, I think, was a minus $3.5 million, but they are for 20, but they are looking at a $65 million deficit in 21. We will have Mike Babinski. We'll be talking to him in a couple of weeks. But Tom, I'll start with you. Just from a business perspective, it's just a daunting thing, daunting environment as we move forward, and what college athletics will look like after COVID is going to be an interesting study, of which an answer that we don't have sitting here on the 31st of January 2021.
Well, there's still money out there, guys. I mean, I think a lot of people felt the coaching carousel, just as a for instance, is going to be spinning relatively slowly after this season. Lo and behold, guys, as we've seen, plenty of schools have written big, fat checks, mega $1 million checks to buy out these coaches, the coaching staffs. Look no further than places like South Carolina and Tennessee in particular. Purdue had to pay Bob Diaco $600,000 or so to leave, right, and not coach this year. We all familiar with the belt tightening, the furloughs, the layoffs and whatnot. Brian talked too, I believe in his weekly word, about, stumping to cancel the Big Ten basketball tournament to make sure they just get this NCAA tournament played. The absolute imperativeness to get that event played, it cannot be canceled for a second year in a row. The revenue loss, I know there's insurance money that the schools reap, but still, they need the full, whatever it is, $800 million they get from that tournament. So, they got to get that thing played, and it's going to be a while, you think, before these coffers get filled back up. But you get the sense there's still some money there, and I saw a story out of Rutgers where they're still moving full speed ahead on some of their football projects. We can talk to Babinski about Purdue's, renovation projects. I guess I'm interested to see where that's at, if they're still actively raising money for it. So, you want to talk about ADs earning their money. This is certainly a time where they're earning their money trying to keep these pieces together in very trying economic times.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, obviously, NCAA tournament is going to get played one way or the other. I think that's a pretty clear thing. And I think you said offline, it affects programs down the road as much as anybody else. And you're right, the insurance policy last year for the Big Ten, I believe, or for the NCAA was basically half of the value. And I'm unclear whether there's insurance still left or availability for this year. No matter, they can't even afford a 50% cut in the insurance policies. Basically doesn't help them because it would be catastrophic. Long story short, Brian, is it is an interesting study, and you see these athletic directors and commissioners trying to push these conference tournaments, the conference tournament, not the NCAA tournament, push that decision back as far as possible because there's substantial revenue there if you don't play the conference tournaments. Brian, we're going to be monitoring this, and yet that's going to be a storyline from February throughout the month of February, one would think.
I can talk for an hour and a half on this if you want me to. I'll spare you. A couple of points to make about finances. The NCAA tournament has to get played because two things. One, it's my understanding they can't cash in the insurance 2 years in a row.
I think that's correct.
There's nothing if there's no NCAA tournament this year. Second, the NCAA tournament money is not about Michigan and Purdue. It's about Cleveland State and New Orleans and
Wofford,
McNeese State, Wofford, those schools that don't have football money. And if they had football money, it wouldn't be enough to fund an athletic department anyway. Those are the programs that lost their you-know-whats this year, too, in a lot of ways on buy games and whatnot, because A, either those games weren't getting played, or B, the payouts were significantly reduced because there was no attendance. There were no fans at a lot of these schools. Two, so they have to play an NCAA tournament. They can play it on a PS5 if they have to, but there has to be an NCAA tournament. Whether or not CBS would want to put that on television, I doubt it, but there has to be some sort of NCAA tournament. To the point about money and spending around college football especially, one thing to keep in mind here is that athletic departments are taking a bath here. The true extent to which won't be known until next year when the reports come out in terms of what they look like after a full football season is lost. But when you fire a coach, where does your money come from to do that? It comes from your boosters. It comes from your millionaire fans. And, not to turn this into a social commentary of any kind, but millionaires made money off the pandemic. A lot of them did, I should say. A lot of people, weren't as hit by this at certain levels of, our economy as people toward the bottom. So the places where the money has always come from is in a lot of ways has been relatively unaffected. It's still there. So if South Carolina wants to get rid of Will Muschamp, you still call the same guy you called when you wanted to get rid of, whoever the guy before that was. I don't even remember anymore. I can't keep all my SEC coaches straight because they change every year. So I guess that's kind of my point there, is that even though the athletic departments are losing their you-know-whats from a bottom line perspective, the people where the money comes from to make bold moves, to hire new people, to get rid of old people, that money's still there. It's just a matter of whether or not those people nowadays want to, I guess it kind of depends on how much they have invested in GameStop. But by and large, a lot of those people still have their money and are apparently still willing to spend it on frivolity such as firing coaches.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing with Michigan being maybe the opposite, where the money is there also, but they've also, you could argue that with Jim Harbaugh's retention, that they at least took a step back. It's going to be an interesting storyline. It is a challenging one. I would agree that in the long term, it will get figured out up to a point, but it may be a few years of in certain places. I'm talking about the big time Power 5 football schools. There'll be some places where it's going to take some time to figure it out. I
do want to clarify something I just said real quick before I get angry emails. Yeah. I understand a lot of millionaires were hurt by the pandemic too financially. I get that. But I know a lot of rich people are still very rich after the pandemic. And that's my point, is that there are still people out there with a lot of money, no matter despite the pandemic, who are still willing to spend that money. So if you're a millionaire who I just offended by suggesting you didn't lose money on the pandemic, that's not what I meant.
I guess and it's just, instead of writing a check to pay off Will Muschamp, that check could have been directed to a school to help in another way, though.
Yeah,
maybe that the money still gets diverted from a more I don't know, whatever you want to call it, a more genuine cause to a facility improvement. To people don't have to get furloughed as opposed to paying off $1 million coach and giving them more millions of dollars.
Right.
So yeah, it's like I said, it's just been a weird, surreal time. And I was talking to a relative last night. It's just been like a movie, something I never would have dreamt I would have lived through. But again, as Brian said, our circumstances have not been of the ilk from a pain position as a lot of people. So I'm not complaining, but it's just been bizarre to see some of these storylines that have unfolded the last 10 months or so.
Yeah.
We're living right now.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting, and we're not trying to bite off more than we can chew here, but it is going to be a race to, can you put people in the stands come September?
Okay, real quick, I'd love to hear your guys' prediction. Capacity in Ross-Ade Stadium 2021.
Well, I think it's impossible to predict, because I think the vaccine, we're still,
you got to make a prediction now, Alan. Come on, buddy.
My prediction is they'll get some level of people in the stands. Now, I don't know that they'll be, you look at, I'm going to use an example here, and it's not apples to apples. Australia and the Australian Open, they're putting, obviously COVID has been relatively controlled down there. Their infections rate is way down, and they've got people in the stands. They are not for the Australian Open. I think that's one example of obviously these sports franchises know that they've got to do this. And like Brian said, it's almost not quite, but like the NCAA tournament with respect to it has to happen. They got to find a way to make it happen. So, I think it could affect timing when that season starts. Again, it's early. It's February. We're early in the vaccine. But it'll be an interesting storyline to watch, because there's tremendous motivation for these Power 5 schools. When you think about Michigan, for example, that was quoting a $60 million figure for football revenue sales. Now, Purdue's is about half of that, if that. It's just so substantial that there's going to be a lot of desire to make that happen. Brian, any other?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say 50% as of September, with the potential to expand through the course of the season. But I'm also going to say, hey, it's up to us. It's up to society. It's up to people to keep doing the right thing, to keep doing everything we can to get this under control. If you're an anti-vaxxer, hey, you're entitled to your own worldview. Do what you got to do, I guess, to be able to sleep at night, whatever the case may be. But hey, let's not get in the way of other people getting vaccinated here. These people who were disrupting the thing in LA yesterday and actually prevented people who've been waiting for hours to get vaccinated. Guys, come on. Just let everyone else live their lives the way they want and need to live their lives. Just keep it to yourself, all right? Let's not work against the greater good here just because you believe something that not everyone else believes, okay? Just please, society, help us get back to normal. Help us get the economy fixed right now. The economy and the pandemic are the same thing. We can't rebuild the economy until we get the pandemic under control. So even if you don't believe in the vaccines, guys, let everyone else get their vaccine so that we can kind of move on here. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, that'll be guaranteed for at least a Carter letter or two. But no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I'm in a healthcare family, and it's.
If you're going to stand in the way of somebody else getting vaccinated because you don't believe in the vaccine, screw you.
Yeah. That part of it is just hard to understand. All right. On that note, we're going to put this Sunday conversation to a close. We want to thank our sponsor, the Purdue Union Club Hotel, who is also looking forward to things returning to normal. But it's a reinvented facility. It's a beautiful one. We appreciate them. And also a reminder, too, that you can join the conversation at GoldandBlack.com, become a member, 40-day free trials available. Guys, have a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to next weekend. The Boilermakers play Northwestern. I don't even think game times are set for Tuesday yet for the game against Maryland. Has not been set. I'm not even sure Saturdays has against Northwestern, but we'll check local listings, so to speak, and we'll let you know as soon as we know, and we'll have a conversation next weekend as part of that. Guys, thanks so much, and we'll look forward to talking to everybody next week on our weekend conversation.